Hari Om. Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaramekam. Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaramekam. Niranandamanandamadvaita purnam. Niranandamanandamadvaita purnam. Param nirgunam nirvishesham niriham. Parabrahma rupam Ganesham bhajema. Parabrahma rupam Ganesham bhajema. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste. Welcome to session 92 of Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. Today we are taking up verses from 6 to 10 of Bhakti Yoga. Here Krishna promises to liberate his bhaktas from samsara and advises Arjuna to abide in him by whatever method he can. At the end of the session, we will have the chanting of these verses. Now, before Dr. Hegde sir introduces us to the day's topic, let's look back at the verses we studied in our last class with Dr. Vasumati. Over to you, Vasumati ma'am.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The sadhanas of karma, upāsana and jnana yoga should be practiced only in the atmosphere of īśvara bhakti, without which they cannot be called sadhanas at all. In the atmosphere of bhakti, these sadhanas become yoga. Thus, bhakti yoga is all the three yogas put together. The culmination of bhakti yoga is the knowledge aham brahmasmi. The chapter begins with a question from Arjuna based on the previous teaching. Here Arjuna asks, is Saguna Bhakta superior or is Nirguna Bhakta superior? A very important question. First, he describes Saguna Bhakta in the first line. Saguna Bhaktas who regularly meditate with constant commitment, sincerely, steadfastly. Arjuna is referring to Saguna īśvara as described in the previous chapter. It is Vishwarupa īśvara, Anēkarūpa īśvara, the Lord as the entire cosmos itself. And then Arjuna introduces the Nirguṇa Bhaktas in the next line. He says there are some other people who worship Aksharam Avyaktam. Aksharam means Nirguṇa Brahman. Avyaktam is that attributeless īśvara, not perceptible to any sense organ. And Arjuna's question is, who is superior between the two? Indirectly, the question is whether Nirguna Brahma is superior or Saguna īśvara is superior. Now, Krishna answers this question in the following verses. In the second verse, Lord Krishna says, fixing the mind upon me with great faith, those ever steadfast devotees who meditate upon me are considered to be the best yogis by me. So what is the answer? Is Saguna Bhakti superior or Nirguna Bhakti superior? These can never be compared because one is the means and the other is the end. Saguna Bhakti is sadhana, the means, the stepping stone, and only through Saguna Bhakti one has to reach Nirguna Bhakti, which is Advaitam. There is no real choice between them. But Krishna does not want to tell Arjuna the question is wrong, but gives an intelligent answer. He says, Saguna Bhaktas are superior, Nirguna Bhaktas attain me. Saguna Bhakta is indeed great, so that everyone will take to Saguna Bhakti in the beginning. Once the person has sufficiently practiced, he can be slowly absorbed into the Nirguna Bhakti, which is otherwise jñānam. Here, Krishna says, those people who practice Saguna jñānam, they are indeed superior. So Saguna people have been glorified now. Later, Krishna will confuse us in the next verse saying that Nirguna people reach me. So in short, the idea is do not compare. Nirguna īśvara jñānam is an integral part of Jnana Yoga Sadhana and is called nidhidhyasam, which is meditating upon my highest nature. And what is the description of Nirguna īśvara? Krishna uses several words in this verse number 3. First description is avyaktam. Avyaktaha means sarva indriya agocharam, not perceptible to any sense organ. Achintyam cannot be conceived, thus cannot be delivered, says Swamiji. Therefore, unobjectifiable by your mind also. Mano agocharam. Anirdeshyam, Lord cannot be described, indescribable, so imperceptible. Sarvatragam. He is everywhere, all pervading. If the Lord is all pervading, he is achalam too, that which does not move. The words sarvatragam and achalam indicate free from the spatial limitation, anantam. The next word is kutastam. Kutastam means nirvikaram, free from the sixfold modifications which are caused by kala tattvam, the time principle, the changeless substratum. Since Krishna is changeless, nirvikaraha, he is dhruvam. Dhruvam means eternal, kala atitaha. So, sarvatragam and achalam indicate desha atitaha, spatial transcendence, and dhruvam represents kala atitaha, time-wise or temporal transcendence. As we hear this description, we wonder, how can we meditate upon such a featureless Brahman? And therefore, Krishna says, to come to this level, a person must have qualifications, and these qualifications are mentioned in the next verse, number 4. One qualification that Krishna emphasizes is Indriya Gramam Samyamya. One has to master the extrovert sense organs, which are all the time wandering. And if the sense organs are wandering out, it does not matter, but they carry the mind also along with it. The next qualification is Sarvatra Samabuddhaya. So maintaining equanimity under all circumstances, essentially arising out of raga, dvesha. The third qualification mentioned here is Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha, being committed to the well-being of all creatures, which is universal love. This is the qualification for Jnana Yoga or Nirguṇa īśvara jñānam, which is the highest level of Bhakti. The benefit of such a meditation, te mam eva prapnuvanti. Such people attain me alone. In verse number 12.5, this next verse, Krishna openly admits that Nirguṇa jñānam is extremely difficult, which indirectly means Jnana Yoga is extremely difficult. Kleshaha adhikatamaha, difficulties abound, obstacles are innumerable for avyakta sakta chetasam, for those people who are committed to the formless God. What is the reason? Because avyakta gatihi dukkham. So the destination of the formless one is indeed difficult to reach. So Nirguṇa jñānam is extremely difficult to practice for dehavadibihi, for the ordinary people. And the obstacle, Krishna says, is deha abhimanaha, attachment to one's own physical body, which makes the mind very gross. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you, Dr. Vasumati, for giving a nice revision of the 5 verses that we studied in the last class. That is the first 5 verses of the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Sadashiva samarambam shankaracharya madhyamam asmadacharya paryantam vande guru paramparam. Om. We continue our study of another 5 verses of the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And as we look into this chapter, which is titled Bhakti Yoga, we need to see this chapter from the background of the Disha classes. Now that we have studied the Disha classes, discovery of inner strength and happiness through the Gita, we have also declared that those of us who have been in the study of the Gita for some time should see ourselves as senior students of Vedanta. And as senior students, when we come to study the Bhakti Yoga, we need to see that Bhakti Yoga is covered in the previous chapters also. In fact, right from the 7th chapter onwards, you have so many wonderful verses on Bhakti, and they need to be integrated in this particular chapter. One fact is very common. Right from the 7th chapter, Sri Krishna brings about that Bhakti and Jnana are not two separate sadhanas. Unless we have spiritual wisdom, our emotion to God is more emotional, and it will not sustain through difficult moments. In difficult moments, if we have to tide over, it is spiritual knowledge that will help us. And therefore, we now understand that Bhakti is not a single sadhana, but a range of sadhanas involving, as we will see from today's class also, 2 levels in Karma Yoga, Sakāma, Niṣkāma, upāsana, also 2 levels, Anēkarūpa, īśvara, and finally, unless we become a jñāni bhakti. So the emphasis of the Bhagavad Gita, you will see right from the 7th chapter, is that your bhakti to God will become more the more you know God. It is just like this: the more you know someone and the greatness of somebody, the accomplishments of somebody, the more you get to love and relate to that person. Now, let us quickly recap how the 7th chapter begins. The 7th chapter begins by Shri Krishna declaring that I will tell you, Arjuna, my true nature. My true nature consists of 2 parts. The title is jñānam and vijñānam, but Krishna uses 2 technical words. He says, my higher nature is called para and my lower nature is called apara. And then he says, whatever you can see and experience, which includes my own body and mind, which I can experience, Shri Krishna says is my lower nature, and the experiencer of all of them is the higher nature or para. After giving an introduction of the higher and lower nature, Shri Krishna then begins to tell us why, even though everything is God, whatever I see is God, whatever experience is God, why is there samsara? Shri Krishna enlightens us that our ignorance, right from the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter, that all the cause of samsara is Atma Ajñānam Samsara Karanam, Atma Jñānam Moksha Karanam. When I do not know my higher nature, I see my lower nature and I get attached to all the objects that I see. And I believe that the apara prakriti can give me peace, security, and happiness. And I invest so much on my apara, which I said are these 5 things: my body, my mind, my profession, my family, my possessions. And none of them can give me permanent peace, permanent security, permanent happiness. And if I need that, which all of us need, we have to make a shift to the para prakriti. And that para prakriti is possible only through the exercises that we do or through jnana yoga. Shri Krishna begins his classification of the various types of bhaktas. Unfortunately, if you see the world today, how many people actually turn to God? Many people do not even have the certain amount of punya to come to bhakti. Blessed are those who have bhakti. That means even when before you start any activity, you invoke the presence of God. Even before you start a journey, you seek the blessings of God. So even if it is seeking for certain difficulties, artha, artharthi, it is okay. You're still a big rung higher. Now, as we go on higher, it will, the more I get to know about God, the greater becomes my devotion to God. In the 7th chapter, we have the 16th verse, which all of us know. Chaturvida bhajanti mam jana sukrito Arjuna arto jignasu artharti jnani cha bharatarshaba. O Arjuna, there are 4 kinds of bhaktas. What are the 4 levels? He says, the 4 levels are artha, the one who comes in crisis or those who are in difficulty, a large percentage of them. Then there are those who want to accomplish something where the world is the goal and God becomes the means. But then if a person, pariksha lokan karmachitan, when you have examined your life and you have found that all your worldly accomplishments come under that bad acronym, bandhakatvam, atripti karatvam, and dukkha mishritam, then you realize I need to make a change. The world is not going to give me permanent peace, security, and happiness. That's when you realize that it is only the para prakriti, and para prakriti is only possible through spiritual knowledge. That is when you become a jignasu. And a jignasu is what all of us are, and we are now trying to get to know God. Now God is no longer the means, but now God is the goal. Shri Krishna then, in this chapter, that is in the 7th chapter, praises a jnani bhakti in 3 verses. That is why, as students of Disha, We know this verse 16, but can I ask you, what is verse 17, verses 18, and verses 19? These are three verses I will stress very importantly, are very important verses where Sri Krishna invests three verses of the Bhagavad Gita, verses 17, 18, and 19, which all of us have to know, where Krishna declares who is the greatest of them all. This is verse 17. Tesham, he says, among them, jñāni, a spiritually wise person, nitya yukta, who's always established himself in me, eka bhakta. Eka means advaita bhakta, vishishyate, he excels everybody. Sri Krishna has declared the jñāni to be the best among the four. And he says, such a person is dear to me, and I am also very dear to him. Why? Because once you have identified yourself with the Bhagwan, there is now no more distinction between the Bhakta and Bhagwan. And that is the important 17th verse of this 7th chapter. There are a few misconceptions which are clarified. Many people feel that you can follow Bhakti Yoga without coming to jñānam. And this particular verse says, see, the highest form of a bhakta is a jñāni bhakta. And another misconception is a jñāni cannot have bhakti. Why not? A jñāni, in fact, will have tremendous amount of bhakti to īśvara and Guru for having helped him to understand his true knowledge. And jñāni or jñānam is possible only through systematic study of the Vedantic scriptures under the guidance of a competent acharya. Verse number 18. This is another beautiful verse. Now, Sri Krishna has declared there is this artharthi, there's artha, there is a jignasu and a jñāni. And he's declared that among all of them, jñāni is best of them. Now, whenever you say of all my four children, this is my most favorite, then what happens to the others? So Sri Krishna brings about a correction here. The correction is udhara sarva all of them. All of them are great. He says, definitely, he loves a father would love all his children. But then he says, me matam, this is my teaching. This is my opinion. This is my understanding. That a jñāni is identical with me. A jñāni becomes one with me. And such a person, again, as he repeats the same words, he is yuktatma, mam eva anu uttamam gatim. Such a person has attained to the highest goal. And this highest goal, therefore, is Parama Purushartha. See the importance of these verses. That is why in our exercise of Disha, these are the verses that we would like to focus on and tell us, see, here Krishna is giving us an emphasis on Parama Purushartha. This should be your goal, because this is the highest anybody can achieve, being a Manushyatvam, Mukshutvam, Mahapurusha. If we have got these three things, let us invest all our energies to be able to become a Jnani Bhakta. And finally, in the 19th verse, Sri Krishna gives a most superlative verse. This verse we should always remember. Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyante. After many births, a Jnani attains me. Now, sometimes this may be discouraging, that to become a Jnani means that you have to undergo many births. Our teacher says, why not think that this is the culmination of so many births? Then we have got an opportunity of a satsang like this, a teacher like Swami Paramarthananda, who is crystal clear in his teachings. And therefore, this is our opportunity. And then he makes a great declaration, Vasudeva Sarvam Iti. Now, Sah Matma, Sah Durlabha. Such a person is extremely rare. Who is extremely rare? Such a person who is able to see Vasudeva as everything. Vasudeva does not mean the form of Sri Krishna. In the Bhashyam, Sri Swamiji declares what is the meaning of Vasudeva. The word Vasudeva is worth investing for a student of Vedanta. Vasuhu means that which exists. That is why whenever we were going through those verses in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, I gave long introductions on what is Sat Brahman. And Sat Brahman iti Vasuhu. That means such a person is able to see Brahman as existence in the world outside. That means a jnani is able to see anything and everything that exists outside as Brahman. And Devaha. Devaha means Chidrupa. There is consciousness here and existence there. These are the superlative verses of the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. After the 16th chapter, 17th, 18th, and 19th, worth investing our time, worth studying, because here is where Sri Krishna says, work on understanding my true nature, and this comes only through the study of the Upanishads, that you will be able to see existence in everything outside and to be able to see consciousness in the world within. Within me, in my own, in the cave of my heart. From these verses on, which Vidya Prabhu will begin to explain, Sri Krishna gives another classification of bhaktas. Vidya, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. This verse indeed is the epitome of Madhyama Shatakam, as this clears all our doubts about Saguna and Nirguna Upasakas. First, Lord said, Saguna meditators are superior, followed by saying that Nirguna meditators will attain him. In the earlier verse, he admits and confesses that Jnana Yoga is extremely difficult. Time and again, it is said everywhere in all scriptures, including in Bhagavad Gita, that Jnana Yoga alone gives jñānam, which alone can remove ignorance. And the removal of ignorance alone gives moksha. Then the question before us is, if Jnana Yoga is inevitable but difficult, then it is difficult for whom? It is difficult for an unprepared student. For the prepared student, it is easy. Jnana Yoga is the fifth and final step in the flight of stairs in the pursuit of Jnana. If the fifth is difficult, then come down to the fourth step, says Lord Krishna, which is explaining in the following shlokas. Etu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayanta upāsate teshamaham samudharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami nachirat partha maya veshita chetasam. Matparaha here means keeping me as the primary goal. Sanyasya here means dedicating. Sarvani karmani, all actions. Mai, unto me. Etu, some devotees. Upāsate dhyayantaha, meditating on me. Mam ananyena yogena, with undivided attention. Tesham, for them. Aveshita chetasam, whose minds are set. Mai, on me. Aham nachirat bhavami, I shall soon become. Samudharta, savior. Mrityu samsara sagarat, from the ocean of samsara, which is beset with death. Partha, O Arjuna. Here, Lord Krishna is coming one step lower from the fifth to the fourth step to remind us again of the four levels. First is Sakāma karma. Second is Niṣkāma karma. Third level is upāsana yoga, which is Anēkarūpa īśvara dhyana, which Krishna calls Abhyasa yoga. The next level is the fourth one, which is Anēkarūpa or Vishwarupa īśvara dhyana. When a person has gone through all these four levels, he attains jnana yogyata, eligibility to enter the fifth and final level, which is jnana yoga. So one has to practice Vishwarupa īśvara dhyana. Lord Krishna tells us, Etu, there are some other seekers who are in the fourth rung of the ladder. Sarvani karmani mai sanyasya, who dedicate all actions at my feet. In Mundaka Upanishad, next slide, doctor. In Mundaka Upanishad, the fourth shloka of Vidya Khanda, there is a reference to the phrase Padabhyam Prithvi, meaning the feet of the Lord are the very earth itself. The Dhyana Shloka of Vishnu Sahasranama also reiterates this idea. Bhuhu Padavyasya Nabhirveda Sura Nilas Chandra Surya Uchanidre, which means everything is Narayana. So when one is doing the action, this action goes to the world and it is acted upon by the laws of the universe, and the Lord's hands are nothing but the Lord shaping the result through his hands in the form of the law of karma. The word sannyas in this context does not mean renunciation. It means here dedicating or offering. What does dedicate mean here? Dedication is nothing but a particular attitude. Karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. That is, I have control over only in the manner in which action is performed, but not in its results. Once I have completed the action has become a part of the universe, which is none other than the rupa īśvara. Lord appropriates this action, and according to the law of karma, an appropriate and just result is going to come. One gets what one legitimately deserves. All actions go to the Lord, and Lord gives the karma phalam, and one has to receive it without grumbling as a prasada of the Lord. This inner receptivity is called dedication, which is īśvara rupa, īśvara arpana bhavana, the meaning of my sannyasya. Matparaha, the primary goal is to qualify myself for the fifth step, the ultimate goal of Nirguṇa īśvara jñānam, the only reality. In these worldly activities, there are chances of distractions and forgetfulness. So Lord Krishna wants the Vishwarupa Upasaka to constantly remind himself of his aim to qualify himself for this knowledge, which is called Ananya Yoga, unwavering commitment to the spiritual path. Mam Dhyayante Upasate. They worship me through this meditation. So Vishwarupa Dhyanena Te Mam Pujayanti. The regular prayer in a childhood, which we were saying mechanically, was Kayena Vacha Manasendriyarva Buddhyatmanama Prakrite Subhava Karomi Yadyat Sakalam Parasme Narayanayati Samarpayami. Now we understand the profundity of the shloka. What will happen to such people is dealt with in the next verse, where Lord Krishna says here, O Partha, these Vishwarupa Upasakas are special to me because their main goal is discovering my true nature, and since they are committed to my pursuit, I will give them special attention. Ananyas Chintayanto Ma Yejana Paryupasate Tesha Nitya Yuktanam Yogakshemam Vahamyaham. Those people who see me as non-different from them offer worship by dwelling on me. I take care of the yoga and shema of those ever steadfast ones. This is a very strong reassurance given by Lord Krishna to all upasakas in the 22nd verse of the 9th chapter. Here, this verse too, Lord Krishna gives a strong abhaya, telling that they are special people who look upon me not as a means for materialistic goals like the Sakāma bhaktas, but as an end in itself, which is the Niṣkāma Bhakti. These upasakas are called in the 7th chapter as Jignasu Bhaktas or the Ananya Bhaktas. And in this verse, they are called Maya Veshita Chetasam, whose minds are set on me alone. Tesha Maham Samudharta. I will save them from Mrityu Samsara Sagarat, means I will rescue them from a samsara which has the problem of mortality. Nurchirat, very soon I'll rescue those people who are Vishwarupa Upasakas, who are in the 4th rung of Bhakti Yoga. Save them does not mean that Lord will give moksha right away. Moksha requires jñānam, and jñānam requires jnana yogyata. So Lord Krishna tells us that these Vishwarupa Upasakas become sadhana chatushtaya sampanna adhikari and attain the mental preparedness for self-knowledge, becoming fit for the 5th rung of the ladder of Bhakti Yoga, that is Jnana Yoga itself. Committing oneself to Vishwarupa Upasana is the essence of this verse. Thus, Lord Krishna tells here that keeping me as the primary goal and dedicating all actions unto me, some devotees worship, meditating upon me with undivided attention. For them whose minds are set on me, I shall soon become the savior from the ocean of samsara, which is beset with death, O Arjuna. Thank you. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you very much, Vidya, for a very nice explanation of these two verses, verses 6 and 7. Now, we have to keep this background, this particular slide as a background, while all these verses up to the 12th verse are being explained. This is the cascade of sadhanas to becoming a jnani, to becoming a jnani bhakta. The first rung will be Sakāma karma, where I do karma, where God becomes the means, the world becomes a goal. Then we come to Niṣkāma, when I do Panchamaha Yajna. Then comes the upasanas of Anēkarūpa, then comes to Vishwarupa, and finally the exercise that we are doing of shravanam, mananam, and nidhidhyasam to attain spiritual wisdom. The next verse will be explained to us by Meenakshi, verse 12. Meenakshi, please.
Thank you, sir. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The verse, Mayyeva mana adhatsva, Mayi buddhim niveshaya, Nivasishyasi mayyeva, Ata urdhvam na samshayaha. Fix your mind on me only. Place your intellect in me. Then, thereafter, you shall, no doubt, live in me alone. Here in chapter 12, Sri Krishna explains to the Pandava prince the different techniques and the levels of spiritual practice which can be followed by a sadhaka to attain the spiritual realization. The Lord begins by enumerating both Nirguṇa and Saguna upāsana, its importance for spiritual development and God realization. In this shloka, the Lord emphasizes the importance of total submission to the Almighty by adopting Saguna upāsana. The Lord says, fix your mind on me alone, mayyeva mana adhatsva. By meditation, mind can be made to concentrate on the form of the Lord, giving up all the thoughts of sense objects. Mere physical devotion is not sufficient. Mind must be absorbed or focused only in thinking of God. The seeker develops an attitude of offering everything to the Lord as Vishwarupa īśvara. Swami Paramarthanandaji says, the meditator can fix his mind on the Lord by adopting Saguna Vishwarupa upāsana, in which the whole world itself becomes the Lord. By placing the emotional mind in the Lord totally, the meditator always feels secure and happy. By meditating upon the enchanting form of the immortal flute player, Sri Krishna, the human mind can readily be made to rest entirely at the feet of the form, says Swami Chinmayananda. Dependency on the outside world other than the Lord becomes lesser and lesser. Next slide, please. Place the intellect in me. Mayi buddhim niveshaya. Beyond the mind is the intellect. We can fix the mind upon God only when we surrender our intellect to Him. For instance, in material pursuits, when we face a situation beyond the capability of our own intellect, we take guidance from a person with superior intellect. To give an example, a common man may not have the knowledge of medical sciences, and so he totally surrenders his intellect and takes the advice of a doctor when in need. Likewise, our intellect is subject to many defects. The attraction towards the material world is simply tremendous, even though we know that it is temporary and results in endless misery in the long run. The intellect becomes habituated to this kind of defective thinking from innumerable previous births. Hence, the intellect which discriminates and determines should be made to focus itself on the Lord. If we wish to achieve spiritual success by fixing the mind on God, we must surrender our intellect to Him. The intellect always questions, for which a satisfying answer can be found in our scriptures. Without scriptural study, even though a seeker is devoted to the Lord, such devotion can become a shaky one. It will end up without proper knowledge and understanding. The Lord, defined as Jagat Karanam, both Nimitta and Upadana Karanam, should be understood with conviction through scriptural study. So the Lord says, Mayi buddhim niveshaya, may your intellect be convinced of what you are doing. Total submission demands absolute faith or shraddha in the God Almighty, which may take years and years or many, many human births. Next slide, sir. To the bhakta who follows this, the Lord promises, Ataha urdhvam nivasishyasi mayyeva. Thereafter, you will dwell in me alone. In this, there is no doubt at all. Na samshayaha, he says. The glory of Vishvarupa Bhakti is the sadhaka is never away from the Lord, just as the wave is never away from the ocean. The Lord resides in everyone, and whole world is his Virat Rupam. So how can the Lord leave the bhakta even for a moment? Every one of us at any given moment is the sum total of what we think and what we feel. If our minds are resting on the Lord and our intellects plunge into the very depths of the Supreme Master, as a consequence, our individualities end and we merge to become one with the infinite, all-pervading Paramatma. So the Lord says, thereafter you shall live in me. Thus, the Lord promises here that when a seeker with an unattached attitude directs his intellect and mind power towards him, he would succeed in reaching the stage of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Very clear explanation and chanting of verse 8. Verse 9, Dr. Sandhya Nanjundaya, please.
Hari Om. Atah chittam samadhatum na shaknoshi mayistiram abhyasa yogena tato mam ichhaptum dhananjaya. Here, Bhagavan is emphasizing on abhyasa yoga, and this is mainly a verse for those who are unqualified or unable to fix their mind on the Vishvarupa īśvara upāsanam. Here, this is step 3 and above the 2 steps of Karma Yoga and below Vishvarupa upāsana, this is called Anēkarūpa upāsana. Next slide. Anēkarūpa upāsana on īśvara means that because we are so attached to our own body and mind, we consider the Lord also to have a body and mind and a form, and it is easy for us to concentrate this and look at the Lord as a pratima with name, form, attributes, and leelas residing in the innermost part of our heart and also our mind. The body is still, the mind is trying to focus on the Lord with a name and a form, and because it is easy for us, this is where most of the seekers are at right now. It is also helpful if we have a mantra from our Guru. This really helps to clear the impurities and the ununderstanding of the mind. If we do not want to concentrate on a pratima, we can also use a pratika, which is a symbol like Om. Concentrate on this in the inner regions of the heart and keep on meditating on the Lord with his name and a form. Eventually, we can also develop a relationship. We can consider ourselves as his friend, as his child, as a servant of the Lord, and in the case of the gopis, beloved of the Lord himself. Next slide. What happens when we start meditating is that our mind wanders tremendously. And this is because we have a strong sense of me and mine, strong sense of individuality. Our Rajogana is very prominent, and we are always interacting with the world, always. So, because we have a strong Raga and Dvesha, when we sit to concentrate on the highest goal of our lives, the mind immediately starts wandering towards the various distractions that we face on a daily basis. But Bhagavan is telling us abhyasa and yoga, practice makes perfect. We have to keep on practicing and practicing firmly, regularly, and undistractedly, and eventually the mind will turn inwards. What does it require? It requires devotion on our part, that this is what I should do. It requires commitment on our part to do it on a regular basis and not erratically, and a conviction that if I do this, I will attain Abhyasa Yoga, I can go to Vishwarupa Upasana, and so on. Of course, the time taken may depend on the various seekers, on their inner characteristics, on their prior lives, and their samskaras, and so on. But Bhagavan here is telling us, definitely one day we will make it. Next slide. What are the things that we can do in Abhyasa Yoga to help us? The first thing is to decrease the amount of worldly thoughts and desires, so that when we sit for Anēkarūpa upāsanam meditation, the mind wanders less and less. And this we can do if our desires are cut down to a minimal extent, that is Indriya Nigraha, as also Mano Nigraha, which is even more important, and putting them together, sit for meditation. The other part is, we are so involved and we think we are the mind. We do not even know that the mind is wandering. It has just gone off and we have gone off along with our mind. So when we realize this, we have to pull it back and keep it back again on the Ishtadevata form that we are seeing. So when we keep on meditating, we find that at some point we realize that, aha, my mind is wandering, let me pull it back. And this is a sign of an intellect that can discriminate and separate itself from the mind. And when you keep on pulling the mind back, eventually the mind stops wandering. Repeated habits, repeated attempts create a habit, and the mind goes less and less. It comes inner and inner, sits on the Lord's feet more and more, and over a prolonged period of time, eventually our focus becomes easy, it becomes effortless, and we are able to see the Lord as a name and a form, though a limited version of the Lord only in the heart. What happens when we have succeeded in Anēkarūpa upāsana is that eventually it will elevate itself by itself for us to Vishwarupa upāsana, because we find the same Lord who is sitting in my heart is sitting in not only all the creatures, even in all the objects of the world, and this itself is Vishwarupa īśvara upāsana. So this is an extremely important verse in that sense, that most of us are in this stage, and it is our mind that is our friend, our mind which is our foe, and let us use a friendly mind and try to lift us up in our expert sadhana. Thank you for you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhya, for a very clear, convincing explanation of the importance of Abhyasa Yoga, training our mind in this particular sadhana with very good illustrations. The last verse for today, verse 10, will be by Apeksha. Apeksha, please.
Hari Om, sir. Abhyase apya samartho asi mat karm parmo bhavah madhartam mapi karmani kurvan siddhim vapsyasi. If you are incapable of Abhyasa Yoga also, be devoted to my works. Even by doing works for my sake, you will attain liberation. Now this verse, the most important word here is madhartam, which I have highlighted here, for my sake. That is īśvara. īśvara we are talking about, for īśvara's sake. So next slide, please. So here Krishna is talking about, if someone is unfit for Abhyasa Yoga, as we heard in the last verse, that if you are incapable of doing Anēkarūpa upāsana or Ishtadeva upāsana, basically that means you are an extrovert and in your life you are committed to a lot of activities, then what should one do? So Lord Krishna gives here a solution here. What one should do, even in our Shastras, there are two types of activities that we talk about. One is Niṣkāma karmani or Paropkara karmani, and the other is Sakāma karmani, which we'll talk about in the upcoming verse. This verse deals with Niṣkāma karmani. So you dedicate your life to contribute to the society, where you look upon the society as īśvara. Now what does this mean? So I'll explain this with the upcoming examples, that what you have to do. If you look at the nature, it is selflessly active. Everything around us in nature, if you look at the rivers that are falling down from the mountain, why are they falling down from the mountain? To serve the humanity. If you look in the second picture, you can see trees, cows, sun, all shining. The trees produce fruits, gives us fruits. Even though we can throw stones at them, but they will give fruits not for their own consumption, but for our consumption. If you look at the cows, the calves, that is their little ones, get very little milk. Most of the milk is produced for our coffee and tea. If you look at the sun, it's shining brightly for our, for our society, for humanity. So you look at the nature, everyone is giving more and taking less. So that means selflessly active. So there lies the lesson for an extrovert person who is committed to a life of activity. Contribute your life to the society where you give more and more and more, and take as much as minimum as it is required. We'll talk about it later more, that how will this help. But one very important point that I and Swami Param has also talked about is, how do you attain liberation? If you are servicing, you're contributing your life to the society, you are dedicating your life to the service of the society. Service itself will not lead to liberation. Let's be very clear about it. But when you do Niṣkāma karma, if you are an extrovert, then what happens is your mind is getting prepared for Anēkarūpa upāsanam, which will again prepare your mind for Anēkarūpa upāsanam, which will prepare your mind to gain the knowledge of becoming liberated or free in life, which is aham brahmasmi jñānam. So second step is lead a life of Niṣkāma karma, selfless activity. So in the next slide, we will see how when we lead a life of Niṣkāma karma, what happens, what is the change that happens within us. And before that, I would like to explain the story here. There's a beautiful story of Prahlada. We just celebrated Holi and everyone knows the story of Prahlada. His father Hiranyakashipu asks him, what did you learn in school? And he just answers in one simple line, which is the crux of Niṣkāma karma, which tells us the way to go forward. One should serve īśvara by making every act into an act of worship. So just whatever activity that you are doing, just do with this notion that you are serving īśvara. So what happens in our every action? Now, what does every action in our life means? Right now, it means the office work or the household chores or dealing with friends and families. These are the three major activities that anyone does in their life. When you serve it as an act of worship, when you think that you are doing it for īśvara, then there is slowly and slowly that sense of doership, that is that I am doing this work. I am running this office. I am running this household. I am dealing with my friends. Slowly and slowly it erodes, because in all your actions, you're thinking you are doing this for īśvara and not for I. That I-ness disappears. So there is an erosion of sense of doership in you. So what happens? So here in Niṣkāma karma, from I am doing this, you shift to īśvara is doing everything. I am doing it. Every act that is happening for īśvara and not for me. So we submit our ego to īśvara here. And as soon as your ego dissolves, you qualify for Abhyasa yoga and then Jnana yoga, as we talked about. And as we showed in the slide earlier, that is the path where you prepare your mind towards becoming free and becoming understanding aham brahmasmi. So incorporating īśvara into every aspect of our lives is Bhakti yoga. So let us now pledge, every activity that we do, instead of saying I am doing it for īśvara, or īśvara is doing everything here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Apeksha. So with that, we conclude our study today to see how every act that we do can be an act of worship. And that is how we bring Bhakti into our everyday life. Our next class will be Disha, third Disha class. It will be on the second chapter, some important verses of the second chapter, verses 11 to 16. And we have a Tattva Bodha topic on Atma. We will have the chanting of the verses that we studied, verses 6 to 10 by Master Anant. Anant, it's your time.
Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Etu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन मां ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहं समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसां मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिं निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वं न संशयः अथ चित्तं समाधातुं न शक्नोषि मयि स्थिरम् अभ्यासयोगेन ततो मामिप्राप्तुं धनञ्जय अभ्यासेऽप्यसमर्थोऽसि मत्कर्म परमो भव मदर्थमपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिमवाप्स्यसि हरिः ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम.
Thank you, dear Anant, for a flawless and beautiful chanting. Thank you, Hegde sir, and all the teachers of the day for an engrossing session. Thank you, friends, for your serious indulgence. Next Friday, on 15th April 2022, let us take up next set of verses. Coming Monday, 11th April 2022, let us log in for Disha 4 at 6:45 p.m. Until then, Jai Shri Krishna. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om.